Okay, good morning and welcome to Just Daf It, Daf Yomi Shir. We're learning Kesubos Daf Chaf number 20. A fascinating shir for you today. We talk about the main topic is Mipiem V'lo Mipiksavam. Generally, as a rule, the Gemara says in Yevamos that we only accept testimony of Edim if it's live, right? If they give it from their mouths. If they write down, they see something, they write it down, and they come to court and read off a paper, they're not believed. What is the idea behind that? The Gemara seems to indicate maybe you should be believed over there when it comes to the Eidim as opposed to the Baal Din, right? The person, the litigant. When he is reading something, the Gemara distinguishes between the Baal Din and the Eidim. The Eidim technically are believed. And how do we resolve that with the concept of shtaros, right? Shtaros are basically when you write a shtar and you give the shtar into the base, and that's been peaks of them. The Eidim are written in the shtar. So if we don't accept written testimony, how do we believe a shtar to be mostly mammon and things like that? These are some of the topics we're going to discuss in the main shir, and also discuss further in Ian of Ben Sion, a separate edition coming up after the main shir in a separate video. Let's get started. At the bottom of Yud Tamad Beis, Tana Rabbanon, about 7-8 lines up from the bottom. Two people are signed on a shtar and they died. Right? We've learned in order to validate a shtar, you have to get kiyum hashtar. You have to be makayim, testify that the Eidim are really the Eidim signed there. It wasn't forged. The Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches, we're talking about the Eidim themselves come and say, we signed in it, but we worked Tanim when we signed in it. We were Psul Eidos. Here, another set of Eidim, not the Eidim, they're trying to verify the shtar. They say it is their signature, but when they signed, we know they were Tanim. They were invalid to give Eidos, or they're Psul Eidos, or Gazlanim, or things like that, or the Krovim, or they were Anusim Machmas, Mammon, or Nefashos, whatever the Gemara discusses there. They were forced to do it. It was coercion, extortion. They really didn't intend to give their validation to the shtar. So the Gemara says, Harei elin amonim, they're believed. Reason being because pesha asar pesha hitir, right? We have no knowledge about the validity of these shtaros, so therefore they're saying we're relying on them. They say it is their signature, but there's a problem with this. They're believed. If we have a different Eidim that say it is their signatures, or we have proof from another shtar that looks similar, eerily similar to these signatures, from a separate shtar that was makuyum, right? Meaning they said there's a problem with the shtar, and they got a kiyum on the shtar, and they authenticated that shtar, and the signatures are similar to this shtar. These people are not believed because there's no longer pesha asar pesha hitter. We have other eidos that validates the shtar. And you're allowed to collect with that shtar. So the Gemara asks, why should you be allowed to collect with that shtar? Fine, you have two validated signatures, but here you have two other eidim that say they're ktanim, or they're anusim, or they're psuli eidos. So it's trey v'trey, two eidim against two eidim. They usually either cancel each other out, or we can't rule in this case. Amar Rav Sheshes also meres hachasha tchilas hazamahi. Must be Rav Sheshes. The reason is that hachasha, it means in this way it's used in the Gemara. Hachasha tchilas hazama. Hachasha is similar to hazama. In the Gemara in Baba Kama, it means something else. When we get to Baba Kama, hopefully we'll figure out why the Gemara uses the same lashon in both cases. All the Gemara is saying over here, Achasha tchilas hazama. They're saying hazama and Achasha. Achasha is when Edom say one thing and Edom come and say something else. Hazama is when they not only say something else, they say the witnesses couldn't possibly have testified because they were with us at the time they testified, and they obviously didn't see it. That's hazama. That's a stronger, and that's right. If you were found to be Edom zomim, right? The Gemara Makos discusses you're subject to the exact punishment that you try to testify. Achasha, you're not really subject to the punishment. So the Gemara says, "Shem shem ezim as Eidim hazam," which is more strict, right? Tabach chafam and aleph. Ezim as Eidim al b'fneim. The Gemara says in other places, because when you're incriminating someone, you can't be machayev someone unless unless they're there. The Edom who are now become the Baal Din, because you said they were with us when they gave the testimony, so you're incriminating them because they get punished for that. So Hazama has to be done in front of the Edom. So it's when you contradict Edom, the Edom that you're contradicting have to be in front of you. And here they're dead, they're not alive anymore. So therefore, Hachasha doesn't work. So therefore, it's not Trey V'Trey. We rely on the two Edom and the Shtar, and these Edom's words are valueless. Amalei Rav Nachman, Ila Havakaman Machishan, Luhabu Hachasha. Rav Nachman objects. He says, if these people were here, meaning the Edom were here, right, so it would be Hachasha. Luhabu Shkachina Behu. Tahavile Edus Muchachash. Muchachash is Hash Delesnu, right? If they were actually present, so it would be a contradiction, right? Hash Delesnu, that these Edom signed on the star, not here, they're dead. There's more reason to believe it, and if they were in front of us, maybe they would have admitted Mehemni, right? Maybe the Edom who contradicted them would be so embarrassed to testify against people that are there. So certainly when they're not there, right, they should be believed. Sorry, Modul, meaning the first Edom would be Moda. The first Edom would be Moda if they were there. So certainly when they're not there, so we should believe them. Ela Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, "Uki trei lahade trei." Really, it is a trei v'trei. Uki mamon b'cheskas mari. We keep the money where it was, right? You can't be the person who's collecting the shtar can't use the shtar to collect money. Maybe the hava nechs the bar shatya, similar to the case of the land of bar shatya. It was a person who was an invalid, a person who had, psychological or mental difficulties at some times, and sometimes he was mentally lucid. The bar shatya zav and nixi asu, he sold some property. Asu beitrei amri kashu shota zav, and some two Edom when he sold it, he was a shota, and the sale of a shota is invalid because you need das to be maknev. Asu beitrei amri kashu chalim zav, and two Edom said no. When he was mentally lucid, he sold it. Amar Ravashi uki trei lahadei trei. We have two testimonies that contradicting each other. Uki mamon b'cheskas bar shatya, and therefore they cancel each other out, or we let them stand by themselves. Neither one is more powerful than the other, and therefore we rely on the chazaka. What's the chazaka? The assumption is it belongs to bar shatya because he was the owner of the land, right? The person who's holding the shtar mecher, they bought the property, bought the house from bar shatya, can't use it to come to basin and collect the house. We only rule this way when there's a chazaka from his fathers. We know the father of bar shatya, who he inherited it from, lived on the land for 3 years without someone being mocha. So he owned the land. His father didn't own the land for 3 years. Right? This shota, or seeming shota, sometimes it's shota, sometimes not. He bought it, right? When he bought it, who says, just like when he sold it, he was a shota. So maybe also when he bought it, he was a shota. And just like person who's selling land, if he's a shota, it's invalid. When you're buying land, the shota is invalid also. So therefore, we go with the chazaka of the previous owner, not bar shatya, the person who owned the land previously, because right, we have no proof otherwise. So you go with the chazaka. The assumption is it goes to the original owner. Just to say it formally, what Rav Nachman basically said before, that even though hazama has to be done in front of them, hachasha, right, contradicting them even could be shelo b'fneim. Hazama shelo b'fneim nami the hazama lo havi hachasha mi'ahavya. Even if you try to maze them the Edom and they're not there, even though it doesn't count as hazama, but it does count as hachasha. Amar Amar, yesh Edom shekasav yadam huzeh shayak sav yadam yosem makom acher mishtar shakar lavirer v'uchzak beis den amadim. So we're quoting from this price that we just on Yud Talmud base. So the Gemara explains dafka kara lav irer in lo kara lav irer lo. It's only if it was protested against and they were machzik the shtar. They validated the shtar, based and validated Makayim the shtar, and said, these are really the signatures of these people. But if it wasn't valid, it wasn't certified somewhere else, it doesn't help you. You can only use another shtar to prove that it's the same signatures, unless that first shtar was validated. We're going to learn Kira Kim shtaros, Midar Abana or Midar Raisa, you have to be Makayim shtar. Aminar Dai. in Mekayim Shtar El Mishtei Kesubos. If you don't want to Mekayim it from a Shtar Mekuyim, you can use 2 Kesubos. But there you have 2 signatures, right? 2 Kesubos have the same signature, O Mishtei Sados, or 2 fields have the same signature, a Shtar Mecher of fields. Husha Achlum Baalem Gimel Shanim V'Shufi, as long as the people that own these fields, that are presently own these fields, have eaten them 3 years, they've established a chazakah that they own the year, and no one protested against them, so then you can mekayim 1 shtar from 2 other shtaros, because it's unlikely to forge if it's the same proof from 2 other places. Amar Rav Simi Barashi, Uvayosem mitachas yad acher, aval miyad asmo lo. It's only when it comes out from someone else's hands. But if it comes out from the person who owns the land, it doesn't help. Right? If it comes out, this shtar comes from his own hand, right? That's not hochzak b'beistin because maybe he forged it. Maybe he saw the other shtar and he forged the shtar. If you have the shtar in your possession, so then we assume, right, then you can't use it to mekayim a different shtar because you have it overnight, you have it for a certain amount of days, you can forge the shtar very easily. If it's somebody else's hand, somebody else is bringing a shtar, even though the shtar is not makuyim, but it says it matches the shtar, so therefore that's able to mekayim it because no one's able to forge that. You can't forge from memory. Tarabanan. A person can write down, he sees Eidos, right? Someone lent someone money, let's say, and he writes it down. This person lent $100 to this person. Even many years later, he forgot about it. He can bring it into Beis Din and read from the shtar, and it's valid. Rav Huna says it's only valid if he can remember the Eidos without the shtar. Meaning, if he remembered only because of the shtar, he's not believed. This is how he passed like Rabbi Yochanan. Even if he's directly reading from the shtar, he has no recollection of the loan. They ask him in court, do you remember the loan? I have no clue about the loan, but I have a document. I wrote down in my ledger that this person, my ledger, I don't know, it's a bookie, I don't know, he said, this person lent $100 from this person. I'm a rabbi, Shamanah, the Rabbi Yochanan, Hani Beitra, the Yadi Sadusta, Menashi Chad Minayu, 2 Edom know Eidos. And one of them forgot. Mitkar Chad Lechavre, one person can remind his friend, because just like you can be reminded from the paper, you could also be reminded from your friend. Ibayilhu Atzmo Mai. What about Atzmo? So what does Atzmo mean? So let's use Rashi's Pshat. Rashi is in Baldin Atzmo Maskiru Achenizkar Mai. Let's say you wrote it down on a piece of paper, the Eidos, and then the Baldin, who is the one who's trying to collect the money, reminds him, you remember the loan, right? So does that count or not? And he remembers because of the shtar, he wrote down a shtar. Do we assume he's coming from the shtar, or he's coming from his own recollection? Of Chalivia Amar Afilu Atzmo, he says even Atzmo, even if he reminded him and he only looks at the shtar, the Baldin says, maybe you have some written recollection. He looks around, he finds a piece of paper. So if he reminded him, no, we don't rely when the Baldin prods him to look for the shtar, to look for this written document. We don't believe it. Presumably we don't trust the guy, right? He's probably trying to do a favor, he's trying to say, the guy who's trying to collect the money, he's probably maybe paid him off, or he's trying to persuade him. So he's going to be persuaded by one of the Baalei Dinim, try to bribe him or try to convince him. So therefore, we can't rely on the written Eidos. He's from a Rabbanan who, however, if the person, when the Baalei Din is a rabbinical scholar, or Afil Atzmo, people that are rabbinical scholars, they don't falsify things. They don't steal from you. They won't steal petty things from you. They don't generally try to lie in Beis Din. I think regular people do, as opposed to the Charedim. People always ask me, they say, you're very against Charedim, You say a lot of bad things against Charedim. And I say, listen, I don't say bad things against Charedim. I mean, I am Charedi, so there's things that bother me about the Haredi population, but there are good things about Haredim also. For example, one of the main great things about Haredim, I could leave stuff in the shul all the time. I could leave my jacket, expensive ties. I could leave my equipment over here, my tripod. No one's gonna take it. I could leave cups or candy bars or chocolate bars around in bags hanging on the hooks outside. No one's gonna steal it. People wouldn't do things like that, and generally they're trustworthy people. They're not gonna lie when they know it's a lie. Maybe when they're not sure, they might lie, but no one's gonna blatantly lie. And I think in the general population, even modern Orthodox people are more likely, not saying everybody, they're more likely to steal things, to lie. Uh, Generally, they're tamimim. Most Haredim are very pure and wholesome, and they wouldn't do these things. Now, to say they're great with money, I mean, they have other weaknesses with money. The fact that, they don't earn parnasa, they rely on asking favors from other people and borrowing money, and sometimes not able to repay those loans. A lot of times not able to repay those loans, and asking for favors all the time. I consider it a bad thing to ask for favors all the time. You can't be a human being if you don't ask for favors from people. You don't have everything. Sometimes you have to ask for favors, but it should be a permanent thing. It shouldn't be something that you're doing all the time. If you're living a life based on favors, and you're always constantly finding yourself asking people to help you, it's not even with small things to help you that you can do yourself. That's the worst thing. When things you can do yourself, you ask people to help you. This is because I think that just comes from the idea of chesed, because Haredim especially value the idea of chesed more than the general population. The general population has a concept of philanthropy and kindness, but it's not looked at as like a specific mitzvah, and Haredim run after the mitzvah. So chesed is like a huge mitzvah. So they're constantly doing favors for other people, even though people don't ask them. They're trying to do favors for them. The problem with this is twofold. First of all, when you're doing favors for other people, you sort of expect that everyone's like that, right? And they should, everyone should reciprocate and do favors for you. Come to expect, and you ask all the time, constantly for favors from other people. I'm not saying everybody. This is not for everybody in the Haredi population, but I think I see it more in the Haredi population than other populations. And secondly, when you ask other people, when you're always running around doing chesed, a lot of times your own needs are not taken care of. You put other people before yourself, and you, your spouse, and your family lose out. So those are the two bad things about running around doing chesed. I'm not saying it's bad to do chesed if you're able to, but I always say gemilas chesed, the Torah says, to repay chesed, to be a grateful person. Someone does you a favor, you should pay him back. You have to be a fair person. Chesed, there's no makor in the Torah. The time it says chasuda in the Torah, is an animal that I think the Torah describes negatively in the Torah. So I don't think Gilei Arayis is called chesed. Right? So chesed is not a good thing. Gemilas chesed is a great thing because it shows that you have an appreciation. You're a fair person. If someone did a favor for you, you pay that back. But you don't have to run around doing favors for everybody, and certainly you shouldn't expect other people to do favors. You come to expect and to ask other people to do favors. You might be upset when other people say no to you for favors. That's a problem. Anyway, back to our Gemara. Somer Rabbanan, he's a Haredi person, a Talmudical scholar. He's probably not going to lie blatantly. He's not going to lie. It's one of the things. They're honest people generally. Kiad Rav Ashi have a Yediyah Levis Hadusa L'Rav Kahana. Like the story of Rav Ashi, he knew Eidos for Rav Kahana. Amar Le Midacher Mar Ha'isa Hadusa. Rav Kahana prodded him. He said, "Do you remember any Eidos from me about this loan?" Amar Le Lo. Don't you remember exactly that I lent him, $100. He owes it to me. Amar Le Lo Yadane. He didn't remember initially. Lasof Idka Rav Ashi. Then Rav Ashi remembered himself. Isidlei Chazil Rav Kahana Dav Machsim. He saw Rav Kahana. He was a little taken aback, Maybe he thought he was the one who caused it. It wasn't you that caused me to recalibrate and to think, maybe the guy did lend him, maybe Rav Kahana did lend him the money. No, I remember exactly clearly what happened. I wouldn't fabricate something and make up something just to help you out because I'm an honest person. Tana Hassam learned in a Mishnah in Maseches Olos. One day I'll get in Mishnah with the Olos, far away. Tana Hassam Atludios Hakrovos, Ben Le'ir, Ben Laderech. Talking about mounds. These mounds, we'll see it's talking near Beis Akvaros, but initially the Gemara doesn't assume that. We're talking about mounds that are elevated above the ground. People have to be worried in Eretz Yisrael, maybe even though Chutz La'aretz is always deemed Tameh. Tumas Chutz La'aretz. But Eretz Yisrael is not deemed Tameh. We're going to see. But if you see mounds, there's a suspicion maybe people were buried over there. They didn't make it to the cemetery. If they're close, one to the city or to the derech or to the path, we'll see what this means. Whether they're newly made mounds or they're old ones. Tmeos, what is tmeos? They're tmeos. They're tmeos. They're considered tummy. We assume a dead person is buried there. Harachokos, if they're far away from the city or the path. Chadashos tohoros. The new ones are tohor. Yishanos tmeos. The old ones are tummy. Ezu krova. What is considered krova? Chamishim amma. Within 50 amos of the city or the path. Ezu hi yashana. What's considered old? Shishim shana. Right? If it looks like it's been made more than 60 years ago, during Meir. Krova shein krova imana. Krova means that it's the closest to the city or to the path. If it's a little far away, we don't have to assume it's Tama. Yeshana she'ein adam zokra. Yeshana means that it's so far back that a person doesn't remember it, right? Which could be more than 60 years, could be less than 60 years. My ear, or my derech. What's considered ear derech? Ear mamish. We're talking about a regular city. Derech mamish. Misfeik amim hatzin tuma. We assume in all the cities in Eretz Yisrael, we find mounds, it's Tameh. Amrish Lakish, Ila Matsu V'tiru Es Yisrael. They found a pretext. The Eretz Yisrael have to remain Torah, and they were retired. Even though Chutz La'aretz, their Tumas, Chutz La'aretz is a Tuma. Eretz Yisrael, they're Matir. They're made Torah. Amrish Zera, Ira Smuchal Beis Akvaros. It means a city next to a big cemetery. Derech Beis Akvaros. Derech is a path close to the Beis Akvaros. Bishlam Derech Beis Akvaros is in the Misrami Ben Hashmashos. It makes sense that mounds on the way, on the path to the cemetery, a dead person can be buried there. The Mishnah Ben Hashmashos, so Mikri Kavru, the tell. Ben Hashmashos comes on Shabbos, or right before Shabbos. They want to bury, so you're not allowed to bury someone on Shabbos, and therefore they can't get to the cemetery. So they bury the person in the mound. A city next to Beis Akvaros, Kuli the Beis Akvaros. You're not going to bury in the city. You'll go to the cemetery. Right, regular people aren't buried there, but in the cities, if they have a nafel, they have a miscarriage, they'll bury it there, and the Nephilim have tuma. Also, live people, I would say it's someone who has diabetes. Until I always thought someone who has boils on his skin, who has acne or something like that. But I read about diabetes last night. Why did I read about diabetes? I don't know. I came up at the table or looking into what diabetes is. That there's type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Basically, both of them, the body's not producing enough insulin to accept, to break down the sugars into your cells, to allow the sugar to break down your cells. You have an overabundance of glucose in your bloodstream. Because of that, your blood flow is restricted, especially to your extremities, like your fingers and your feet, and therefore if you get a wound, you get a scar, a wound, or you get a boil on your feet, it might not be a blood circulation enough to properly heal that, to properly clot, and to properly remove that wound, and therefore that boil, and you're going to have a boil there remaining there, and a lot of times the skin will die, you'll have gangrene, and therefore you have to amputate. Some doctors will amputate the foot or the toes in order that the gangrene shouldn't spread. So that's what I think Muka Shchin is. Someone with diabetes, and they have to amputate Shchin. They have boils there that don't heal from the circulation. This is why Derech Eretz Kadmol Torah. You gotta learn. You gotta Google it. If you don't Google it, if you don't know about the world, you can't say in the Gemara properly. Why is a Muka Shchin? He has acne. He's cutting off his hands. He's a really depressed person because no girls are going out with him. They bury their arms. Until 50 amos from the city, right, she'll go by herself. If it's more than 50 amos, we assume it's tohar, right, because she'll go to the cemetery. She's not going to bury there. It's a mound of something else. We don't assume anywhere else besides where this price suggested. We don't assume a mound that contains a dead body under it. The reason this is brought in, we'll see, the price was brought in over here is because of what Rav says now. When it comes to remembering something, right? Until 60 years from the incident, you can remember. Tefillah midgar. We talked about there's laws and statutes of limitations. You can only testify after 5 years, let's say. According to our mayor, 60 years, we're not going to remember. Below we hasam, the Gemara says really we don't possibly that hasam lo ram yalev al hacha came with the ramala afilu tuva nam. You can't make a comparison from this halacha about burying bodies. Because over there, when people bury someone, they forget about where the person is buried. So 60 years later, we don't assume they remember it. But when it comes to Eidos, people, and they see something, they witness a loan, and it's obligated, the person does a loan in front of them for a reason, and they should remember that he loaned them money. So therefore, people put that in their mind, put that in their back pocket, and they remember that for more than 60 years. That is the conclusion of today's shir. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you in the event. See, and we'll talk about PM Olympics of the main topic to talk about, Ishtaros. You're not going to want to miss it. See you there.